Hello and welcome to the Kuyamungi Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Revere, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we do want to thank you for joining us today. The Kuyamungi Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of that deeper human connection to all of life. It's part of our mission to expand our own experiential research with the multidisciplinary understanding that's available to us today. So as an educational institution, we take an open approach. We invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this conversation or exploration. These weekly Sunday discussions are available on demand. We have a couple hundred presentations between webcasts and YouTubes and podcasting and all of that. They're all free. And as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Kuyamungi Institute. Today, ancient mystery schools have fascinated people for centuries with their mysterious teachings and secret rituals. Much of what happened within these schools remains shrouded in secrecy, and yet they significantly have impacted the evolution, the development of Western philosophy, science, and spirituality. These schools embedded various religious and philosophical traditions with sacred and transformative teachings through initiation and ritual practices. And a crucial aspect of the teaching centered around the profound relationship between the student and the divine. This connection was regarded as a pathway to attain elevated states of consciousness and seeking divine guidance. And our guest today will share how ancient mystery schools provided insights into spiritual and intellectual traditions of the past and shed light on modern day esoteric and mystical practices.
Well, indeed, Paul, I believe that the mystery schools are alive and well today and not so hidden anymore, actually well embraced. I view mystery schools as teachings about nature from nature, direct from nature, at a time when science and spirituality were intertwined, when the means for direct experience of subtle realms were held sacred, and to enhance that normal and natural relationship with the cosmos that we all have, we're all born with, one that fulfilled such deep yearnings, framing the universe in such profound and personal and majestic colors as to shape one's worldview and one's destiny. And perhaps when we embrace this once again, and it is growing, we'll get back on track and be caretakers of our planet. Our guest today, independent scholar, world traveler, will compare the mystery schools of old with those today. And I think our institute is well represented as a modern day mystery school. We revel in that direct relationship with nature, do we not? David Elkington's book is The Ancient Language of Sacred Sound, the acoustic science of the divine. He joins us from London. He's back after several appearances. He is a popular guest here and friend. Welcome back, David, and happy holidays.
Hello, David.
Yeah, and Merry Christmas to you and all. I have to say, it's
Merry Christmas. Yeah,
it's a really beautiful time of the year. I've suddenly cottoned onto it after all these years, that the sheer beauty of the nothingness in nature. Now that we're approaching the shortest day, it gets dark early in the afternoons, and there's no growth on the trees. The mournfulness of autumn is finally over, and finally we're left, all of us, with our own thoughts. And that surely is the root of initiation, in that in the modern world, we're not given time to think about, interior things. We have to focus on the whole idea of the corporate world and Christmas buying stuff and all of that, which is good, but you're not given any time either as a child or an adult. But it's worrying for children because we need that time of inner reflection because we grow inwardly to become wise. That's initiation.
Well, that's a balance, isn't it, from the in and out? And it's also a lovely balance that the Southern Hemisphere is now in their summer as
Yeah,
we're, so that beautiful balance that's continually spinning us around.
I got to tell you, though, as an Irishman, I hated eating Christmas pudding on the beach. In late December in places like Australia, New Zealand, and Polynesia, because I used to get these cards from relatives back in England and Ireland and Europe, and it showed this white stuff that they called snow. And to somebody living down there, you think they've got the sand the wrong color, and it was like sort of, hang on a minute, but they're all wrapped up in warm clothes. I didn't wear shoes for the first 10 years of my life, I mean, when I got back to this country, when my father retired from the Royal Navy, we came back here to England and it was freezing. I mean, I'd never known weather like that before. It was a real shock. And I said, Dad, what's happened? Is it the end of the world or something? He said, no. He said, welcome to Europe. And I thought, crikey. And my feet were freezing. And he said, well, I'm not surprised. You're not wearing anything.
Well, you don't heat your buildings over there very well. It's another issue.
And even the beer's cold,
Yeah. I want to follow up on your initial premise you were talking about, because that's a really significant point you're making, is that what are we losing with this outer attention, this outer technology, this outer focus, where children are not having that opportunity for reflection that you just mentioned, that there's this element
all about
to
gifts, and when the real gift is
right,
one's personal growth.
And,
yeah.
How do we return some of that, especially nowadays with AI and the tremendous advancements that are happening, where there's more and more and more attention on the outer world? How about that inner technology? How do you see
when
that?
our society wants us to be good worker bees and consumers of our planet, rather than fulfilled beings that are bringing in the light.
Right.
I really hope that AI, artificial intelligence, they call it. I mean, personally, that's the kind of person I vote for every 4 years. But no, for politics aside, I mean, I'm hoping AI will kind of do all those niggly jobs that we all would like to be done by somebody else.
Right.
So that it does give us more time to think. But I'm afraid to say that as I get older, I get more skeptical about society and the nature of civilization, particularly in the West, because do they really want us to have more time? Because more time means that we have to think more. And surely, you'd hope that we'd kind of end up going back to a more spiritual aim in terms of,
I've
got more
threatening
time
to the powers that be, right?
Yeah, and we're much more reflective. I mean, this is my first point. There are two words for knowledge in early Western civilization. One is scientia, from which we get the word science, but it's an objective word in Latin. It means more or less, objective, which is from the Latin objacere, which means out there. Mm-hmm. Okay, but then there's the Greek word for inner knowledge, which is gnosis, which is subject. Okay, and if it's subjective, it means it's in here. So we've got two forms of knowledge for a start. So immediately there's a dualism. Now, in the early period archaic period of Egypt and elsewhere, but Egypt for me, because of course I'm an Egyptologist. Although I have to say, I must tell everybody, I went to a party once at my friend Jane Seymour's house in Bath, and I got talking to these two Irish guys, and they said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "I'm an Egyptologist, etc." And they looked at me rather confusedly, and I walked on. And as I came back with my drinks and moved on, I heard one guy say to the other, "Do you see that guy there? He's an Egyptologist. They're giving grants to Egypts now." And I thought, wow, actually, I might change my profession. This is going to go down well. I'm an idiotologist. But however, this is the Irish thing with words and the way we can twist meaning and develop jokes, humor into real philosophy. And this is the problem: is that
It's the wisdom, right? Yeah.
It's wisdom, exactly. Somewhere where the joke is told, in order for us to get that joke, we have to see both sides of the argument. And in the bit where it overlaps, that's where the truth resides. And we laugh for joy because we've seen that truth.
Yeah.
But we cannot tell others what that truth is. You can only tell them through the same symbolism. Because as Wittgenstein said, words are a very inadequate way of expressing truths. So one man's words, one man's truth can easily be another woman's poison. You've got to be
I
careful.
find that so many of the ancient stories are so multi-layered. There's just layer upon layer upon layer of meaning. And the old courts kept their jesters for just the reason that you described, to tell the truth
And they
and
wore
guise
harlequin
it
shirts.
as a joke. Yeah.
Yeah, and they wore harlequin shirts of red and green squares because the green is the green man who in the Egyptian boat of millions of years, which contains all the gods and goes round the earth, for it to rise every morning with the sun therefore has to overcome the whole idea of entropy, which is symbolized by the chaos serpent, which is a negative principle in Egypt called Apophis or Apep. Okay. And you'd think that the god in the boat who spears that serpent with his spear, very much like St. Michael or St. George in the stained glass windows in churches, you'd think that that would be the hero god Osiris. But it's not. It's his twin brother, the god of wild places, Set, who's always portrayed as being red-skinned and wild, because he's the god of ignorance. He's the god of the unlearned. You see? Because that's the way the Egyptians saw such things. And therefore, in spearing the serpent and allowing the sun god Ra to rise, Set becomes his brother Osiris. Okay, so he becomes self-aware.
Yeah.
This is the Egyptian explanation of the idea of self-awareness. And Egyptologists who say today that they didn't have that philosophical level are completely askew. They're kidding themselves because, of course, it was there. That's why they told the legend in that way. The problem for us today is that we expect everything to come pre-packaged. If
just
you
take your little bullet, just take your little pill and you're enlightened. Yeah.
Exactly. If you think for yourself, then you're a danger to society. That's the way we have developed today. And I think most people, looking in on this would agree.
I think that's why initiation and ritual were the menu of these ancient mystery schools, because it needs to dawn on you yourself, not packaged in words, not
yes,
some
exactly.
other human, but direct from the spirits, direct from nature. It needs to dawn in you, and then it's truly known. So direct experience brings that. Yeah.
Well, hence enlightenment, the whole idea of the light bulb going on in the brain. Oh, suddenly I've got it. Because that then leads on to the whole learning experience, the whole wisdom thing. Because once you get it once, you're hooked.
Yeah.
And you carry on. But today, teaching is done by rote. I mean, my son Alex, he's just qualified as a lawyer about 2 or 3 years ago. He's doing really well. He's in the magic circle in the City of London. He's a big star. But I have to say, to his credit, from the moment he went to school, it was like being in a greenhouse. He was force-fed information left, right, and center. And, you kind of think, oh my God, this is really regrettable. But Jennifer and I had to pursue that because otherwise he'd have been left out and he'd be in even worse position. But how sad it is that in the West, we've kind of sacrificed the playtime of children and their imaginations for this need to know as much as possible so that they become cannon fodder for industry. And how shocking it is that
your prep school education at age 3, right? Is that part
Yeah,
of a
I mean, 100
mechanized point of
years.
view where we view a human being as just open the lid and dump, download, as opposed to it just comes from within? Is that, I think that's
It's a
just part of
point.
our mechanized view.
It's a point I made in a recent article for one of the newspapers that in 100 years we've gone from dumping our soldiers, our young men, training them, and dumping them onto the trenches of World War One, where they were called cannon fodder,
Yeah.
literally called that. And now 100 years later, what have we learned? It's cannon fodder for industry, and it's really sad because these young people have got so much to offer. And I have to say, in terms of where we are, I'm very positive. I think we're actually heading towards a real creative breakthrough. I think there's about to be a complete change of attitude because of sites like yours, the Koyamungi Institute and others, who are actually ramming home this idea that wisdom is something that needs to be realized, and it's self-realization.
I
And it
was just
needs
going
to
to say,
be,
this seems to be your mission to really uncover some of these mysteries, make them accessible, and
yeah,
decode them.
yeah.
They're all shrouded, right? And
Oh,
symbol.
totally so. I mean, I had no idea that uh, when I last spoke, I spoke about the Green Man and the purpose of the Green Man, who and what the Green Man was. And then in the run up to appearing today, I started looking at the whole Christmas thing because I'm getting in the spirit of it for the first time in years. I've got to be honest with you. I'm a bit of a Scrooge. I've been sort of miserly at my work and telling everybody it's humbug, and suddenly I've been visited by the ghosts of Christmas, this, that, and everything else. And I'm thinking, actually, no, it's really lovely. I've got the smell of the candles, scented candles behind me. They're really beautiful, and you know, um, and just the lights in town and the beautiful darkness as well, which is pierced by those lights in such a beautiful way. And then I started looking at some work, and of course, in Northern Europe, Christmas was the time of the god Saturn, or Kronos, as he was known in ancient Egypt. What I didn't know was that in European tradition, Kronos was actually the god of this darkness, who then has his head cut off. He's beheaded, and then his head regrows as the winter passes, which is exactly what happens in the story of Gawain and the Green Knight. Now, that's an alliterative poem from the 14th century in which Gawain, a knight of the Round Table, is present at a feast at Camelot when the Green Knight, a huge knight, green, of course, all over, on a green horse, charges his way into the hall of Camelot and challenges anybody there to strike off his head with one blow of his axe. And Gawain does so, and off comes the guy's head, and he promptly just walks over and picks it up, and says, "Right, you will meet me one year hence at the Green Chapel." At which point Gawain thinks, "Oh damn," you know. And so this adventure begins. And about 6 months later, Gawain finally sets off with great trepidation, as you can imagine. And he comes to a castle, and he speaks to the lord of the castle, who says, "I know where the Green Chapel is. You may stay here until the time comes." And he said, "You will be my guest." And the deal is that the lord of the Green Chapel will go out every day hunting. And when he comes back, he expects Gawain to give him a complete rundown of anything that's happened to him, plus a share of his gifts. Okay. Now, it just so happens that the lord of the castle has a rather attractive and very beautiful wife who's got the hots for Gawain. So Gawain realizes he's got to be really, really sort of, virtuous here. But my goodness me, she gives him a difficult time. And at one point, she even manages to snog Gawain. She gives him a thorough, good going kiss. So, of course, the Lord comes back from his hunt, and Gawain, of course, has forgotten himself. And the Lord says, "Right, here's what I've got today, a brace of pheasant. What has been delivered to you?" And Gawain kind of, he sort of shrinks away and thinks, oh God, what can I do? So he just gives the Lord a tiny peck on the cheek, So it's a sign of incipient honesty, but he doesn't go for the whole, as we would today, on the lips and everything else, So, of course, a couple of days later, Gawain finds himself at the Green Chapel. There's the Green Knight, looking fierce and bold than ever. And Gawain is just he gives in to the idea of death. He lays his head down on the block and says, okay, go for it, do your worst. Because he's defeated, Down comes the axe. And then Gawain turns around and realizes he's still here. And he puts his hand on his neck and realizes just one trickle of blood. And the Green Knight says, that's for not telling me the full truth about my lady. And who turns out to be the Lord of the Chapel. Okay. And so, of course, Gawain rides off and virtue has been restored. But that's the key word that the text states, virtue, which is, of course, the Latin word and Greek word for green. It's the regrowth of nature.
Verde. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So vert, of course, is the pigment we derive from copper, verdigris.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because it turns green.
So there's a link there, you see, of virtue and innocence to the color of green.
Mm-hmm.
So Saturn, in having his head cut off in wintertime, is being virtuous. He's kind of inviting growth. He's inviting the new light to come in.
Right, because the dead plants die, you cut them back so the new sprouts.
Yeah. And of course, what do plants thrive on? They thrive on compost, on the melting of and the rotting of the old leaves. Right. So it's a cycle again,
Right. Life, death, and rebirth. We could also look at this, being an Egyptologist too, Osiris, who is also painted in green hues.
Yeah. And of course, Osiris in certain early incarnation is also shown as a tree.
Mm-hmm.
There's a representation of King Tuthmosis III in his temple, in his mortuary temple in the Valley of the Kings. Tuthmosis III was the greatest emperor. If anybody says no, he wasn't, it was Ramses II. We'll do pistols at dawn. Ramses II was an egoist. Tuthmosis III had it good. It's interesting because Tuthmosis' name, the D and the T in ancient Egyptian are the same sound. So my friend Ahmed Osman believes that Tuthmosis was the original King David, because Tot is Dodd. And I think he's right, actually. I actually think he's right. But there's this beautiful image of Tuthmosis suckling from the sycamore tree, who is Isis. And there's a breast hanging from the tree from which he is suckling. Because, of course, Isis was known as Isis dendrites, which, of course, in Greek means Isis the tree. Mm-hmm. So it's all about the revivification of nature. Okay, and of course, Isis' husband was Osiris, you see.
Yeah.
So again, you've got that same theme. And that's in Egypt, for goodness sake, which is limited to a 2-mile stretch either side of the Nile for its greenery.
And here we have the green Christmas tree, right, as our symbol, dressed with light to herald the return of the light or the longer days. So, boy, we're still celebrating all these symbols, aren't we?
Well, we are. I mean, and again, look at the pine tree. I mean, this is really extraordinary.
Evergreen. Okay.
Yeah. If you rub pine oil into this part here, it will stimulate altered states.
Third eye location. Yeah.
Hence the term pineal.
Oh.
Pineal, pine tree oil. Really?
Okay. The pineal gland was represented as a pine cone in ancient mythography. You see. And so, of course, you've got immediately this symbolic connection. And of course, Dionysius in northern Greece had the thyrsus and the pine cone as his symbols, you see.
Can you just, a quick diversion, oil as a substance for transmission and initiation? When Queen Elizabeth died, we were all watching her story, and that part in her own coronation where they put the oil why is oil such a symbology, and in being infused with different substances as kind of an imbibing of that in its power, its meaning?
It's an interesting question, actually, because obviously in the Gospels we've got the anointing of Jesus as the Messiah.
Well, there's that too.
But what's interesting, again, if we go back to the word Messiah, now oddly enough, I've just finished a chapter about this word itself, because there's evidence of it in the cave site where we discovered the lead and the golden codices in Jordan. There are crocodiles on the cave walls, by the entrances to each individual room or altar place in the cave site, because the cave site is very, very extensive. And interestingly enough, the word Messiah comes from the Egyptian Messe, okay, via the Hebrew Mashiach. It comes from Messe. And Messe is actually the oil derived from the rendering down of a crocodile. Now you think, well, why? Okay, well, at the beginning of the creation legend, in every single archaic myth, the gods have what we call a pre-creation legend. Okay, in order to bring about creation, in order to bring about the creation of civilization, of mankind, and everything else, the gods have to overcome disorder or entropy. Back to the Egyptian Apophis again, okay?
That
And
continual battle between order and chaos. We still describe that in physics
exactly,
today.
yeah. And the crocodile is symbolic of that. So the Messiah is the arbitrator between God and man, who becomes aware of the legend of the need to have order out of chaos. Now, if that's not a discussion and description of nature, then you tell me what is.
Yeah.
If it isn't, you know, and
the eternal dance. Yeah.
exactly, you know, and it's interesting, you know, because when you look at the properties of crocodile meat and oil itself, they are very profound. You know, crocodiles can live in some pretty filthy conditions, as well as doing some pretty filthy things. Yet their skin, their flesh, is phenomenally autoimmune. It's got the most extraordinary properties to ward off some of the most fierce viruses. I've been looked at a friend of mine at the London School of Zoology at the moment, because he said we're looking here at potential medical breakthroughs in the treatment of antiviral properties, even in terms of something. He's saying this could even be better than snake venom.
Yeah. So the ancients knew this, and this is one reason why this substance was given so much.
Yeah, I think that you know the problem for us is we judge the past, but we don't judge ourselves. And if we judged ourselves, then we'd be able to see the past in a much more coefficient and interrelated and equivalent way. And in doing that, we would see that whereas our knowledge is objective, theirs was subjective. And somehow they knew about this stuff. Now, I don't know how they picked up on this, but we know they didn't have laboratories and test tubes and all of that.
Couched it in the language of science, but couched it in a language of the mythopoetic and symbol.
Exactly. Yeah. This
so
is
we
what
can read through that. I mean,
yeah.
you look at life versus life, inanimate versus inanimate. Life adds order, right? Life orders itself, and the opposite, chaos, is disassembling order. So those two forces, when you're looking for the origins of life, look at what is the spark that asks it and allows it to cohere, right? And
But I think of Mendeleev and his gaining of the periodic table in the 1860s. He went out for a walk in one of the big Russian forests, etc. Had a great time, and he went to bed. He had a good night's sleep, and he woke up with the periodic table completely, absolutely there in his head.
Downloaded in a dream.
Yeah. Just wrote it down, and there it was. Yeah. And that was one of the biggest breakthroughs in scientific history in the modern period.
Yeah.
You know, stop. That's it. And you think, my goodness me, how astonishing. It does happen. And that's what we need to look into more, because
And that's what mystery schools were trying to set the stage for, right? That
they're
transmission of
setting
knowledge.
the standard for not just raising consciousness, but for making us more self-aware of what could happen to us, what can happen to us, and what most likely will happen to us, you know?
And reading nature, we're of nature, we're made of nature, nature, we're following her principles.
Well, now you've just hit the nail on the head there, because again, going back to my initial expertise as an Egyptologist, I shan't ever refer to myself as an Egyptologist ever again. Um, um, you see, in Egypt, we've been conditioned by monotheistic religion to see the Egyptians as polytheistic, that is, multiple gods. That is not strictly true. They believed in one God and one God overall. But the problem for them was, quite logically, they saw the idea of God as being so massive, so dramatically huge, that it could not be expressed as a principle in either thought or script or anything. It's just that they had to be aware of the presence. So the way in which they expressed it was in the way in which we see the individual eyes on a peacock's tail. Every eye is a separate principle of nature, so and named after what we have termed a god. But the word natura, which we translated as gods, okay, and which became our word for nature, doesn't mean gods at all. It means principles of. It means aspects of.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful description of the many eyes of God. How is this principle omniscient and omnipresent, but that it's localized infinitely?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, these people really had it going.
Diversity and the unity.
Yeah. You know, and this whole idea that the Egyptians were obsessed with death, it's simply not true. Your civilization doesn't last for 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years if you're obsessed with death. You know, we've seen that in the current crises going on with Islam and everything else. Tragically, death cults do not last long. The Egyptians were obsessed with life,
and
rebirth. They wanted to investigate what life was, what was beyond it. Do we come back, and so on and so forth. It's really extraordinary stuff,
which we're still investigating today. There are many efforts to investigate that as we speak.
I'm reading this really fascinating book at the moment, which I discovered in the British Library about a year ago. The Phoenicians are a much underestimated civilization, and they've been subject to such awful, awful press by the academic world. I'm ashamed to say. But there's this wonderful book by Joseph Aziz, that's Azize, called The Phoenician Solar Theology. It's not the easiest read because it's an academic book, but I must tell you, it is very, very profound.
What does it say?
Yeah. I'll give you one example, a meager example, but I'll give you an example. The man credited with the first theory of the atom is a Greek called Democritus. Well, Democritus himself admits that he did not come across this himself. He got the information from a Phoenician called Moschus. Moschus, okay, obviously an extraordinary man, but Democritus said that the atom cannot be divided. Okay, Moschus, the Phoenician, said, "Oh yes, it can." And you think, "Oh my goodness me!" And when you read Aziz's book about the whole solar mythology, because of course, if you split an atom, bang, you get the whole light thing. You've got the legend of Zeus. You've got the legend of Zeus and Semele. Semele, he'd had an illicit affair with her, and Semele said, he'd offered her a gift, and Semele said, "I want to see you as you were," and he said, "Oh, I don't recommend that," and she insisted, and of course he showed himself, and boom, she was gone. And you think of those poor Hiroshima victims and everything else, but the thing is that it's talking about pure energy. And of course, Zeus saved her unborn child, who just happened to be the god Dionysius, which he then implanted in his thigh. and was born, some months later. Semele basically means the moon in Greek, by the way. It's a three-phase moon. But again, all of this is very Phoenician. And what Oziz reveals in his book is that Pythagoras himself was Phoenician, not Greek. And of course, Pythagoras is talking about some of the most extraordinary mysteries. He's talking about the mathematical and musical mysteries, all of which had their influence on the northern mystery schools as well. And you think, my goodness me, it's what we need to know is there. We just have to go and look, This is astonishing stuff. And I kind of feel very sorry today because in the Victorian period, right up until I think about 50 years ago, we had two forms of science in the academic world. We had applied science, we had pure science. Now we just have applied science. There's very little pure science in terms of the I want to just go out there and study it for what it's worth. I just want to kind of investigate. Now it's all applied. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like science for profit. I'm going to develop this, I'm going to develop that. I'm just not going to engage on the quest and see what comes up. Yeah. Which is very sad because it's kind of like the loss of imagination in a funny way. It reflects that whole idea of our lack of consciousness in terms of where we're heading, because we know now, we know where we're going. Thank you very much.
Well, when your church is commerce, that shades everything.
Yeah, well, this is what I find so sad about going to church. Carol services and stuff. There's no discussion anymore about the potentials and possibilities and the links with other faiths. I was talking to a vicar, a few months ago at a carol concert, a very early one, and I said, there is evidence to suggest that paganism was not borrowed by Christianity, but in fact that Christianity may have come first and contributed to paganism. Because I've come up with certain documents that date back to about 1500 BC that suggest that, and he just didn't want to engage at all, and it's like sort of, oh, how sad, and Christianity in a way, it's given us so much, it's given us so very much, and what strikes me as being sad is that it's in preserving so much, we're not seeing that it's preserved it, Classical world was going to come to an end. It was going to change. The Egyptian culture was going to come to an end. They knew it. So they preserved as much as they could in wall stele, in temples, the structure, the layout. Later on in the classical period, we had the rise of books and codices and goodness knows what else. And that was preserved. And then the Christians took it all over and ran with the same baton, And it's all there. We just have to see it. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, we're riven by polarities in terms of thinking, the way we do things, and it's terribly sad.
Well, it sort of takes us back to, this idea of where mystery schools, what is the purpose? What is it that ties all of this together? And mystery schools gives it the foundation, the ability for the knowledge to be contained and followed in a prescribed manner. I know that there's a lot of controversy around mystery schools being secretive and all of that, but there's a reason for it, that the knowledge has to follow particular steps of knowledge and how the knowledge is integrated together. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, let's also look at it from the modern commercial angle. If you've got a secret, people want to know what it is.
Right.
So of course you're going to get, a lot of people interested if you give them gradual increments to the secret. But if you just advertise it on a billboard and say, oh, hi guys, here's what it is, your business collapses. And also let's not forget the one essential and critical factor here. The human race is easily bored. Boredom has been the killer of civilization in the modern world. So therefore, you've got to keep everybody going. Now, that's a very Irish way of seeing it, and I fully agree. I'm a totally Irish person. But the fact of the matter, it's true. I have seen boredom at its worst. And as soon as people get bored or irritated by something, they go elsewhere because they want the latest fix, the latest hit, But the nature of
we're all on a quest and we just have to keep going. Something has to beckon us over the next hill.
Yeah, exactly. And mysteries, they teach you self-discipline as well. They teach you to keep going, you know. There's times when I've got bored and fed up with the whole thing, I have to say, and I've walked away, but then you have a bit of a break, and frankly, you never get away from it. You can't. It's difficult. I mean, I'm taking 2 weeks off as of today, but I guarantee you I'll be back at work the day after tomorrow because I get bored. And it's an awful thing to admit, but it's true. I just get really bored. So in the end, I end up coming back to working and thinking, oh, bloody hell. But then I discover something and think, actually, no, not bloody hell. This is amazing, you know? And you want to share it with people. You want to kind of discuss it and, you know, and you get your passion back again. It's wonderful, you know?
While we open it up to our audience questions, raise your hands. I'd like to ask, how do you see what I just think mystery schools are still alive and well and all around us, and we're expounding this. Science is letting us know so much about nature. We're looking at the subtle realms. When you have scientists saying, like Bucky Fuller, 99% of the spectrum is invisible to us, and that's where the magic is happening, and that's what we're exploring in the future. When you have efforts in physics to decode and strip away what's the fundamental strata of reality,
Right.
and when you have so many people like us saying, let's go to those, let's experience those subtle realms, bring them in, open our bandwidth, and see what nature has to say to us.
Structure to it.
When you have this so commonplace in a dialogue that we can all have, when we're seeing our very technology inside, our inner tech is about looking at this. When these eternal questions pop up again and again and again, we can't let go of this. I think it's all around us. So I was wanting to ask, as our audience raises their hands, how do you see what we are accepting today, what we're imbibing today as modern day mystery schools and those of old that you're decoding? Aren't we all singing the same song in effect?
May I add to that question also? And there's also an impatience in today's society where we want to go to a weekend workshop to become a shaman.
That's
we
a
want
good
to
question.
it's a segue. But so there's an impatience where we don't want to take the time that it takes to go through the full extent of what the mystery school has to offer. We want to learn things quickly.
You were fooling yourself if you think it's one download.
I mean, actually, that's actually very obvious in classical music today. If you play Beethoven's Ninth at 4/3/6 instead of the 4/40 you get today, it's a very different piece of music. And I get annoyed when I listen to BBC Radio 3 these days because they kind of have lovely pieces of music, which I'm very fond of. Like I love Grieg, I love Peer Gynt, you know. But they've got a habit of playing the In the Hall of the Mountain Kings so fast, it's like they want to get it over and done with. Oh, okay, lads, we're due down the pub in about 2 minutes. Let's get this over and done with, you know. And they sort of whiz it through it, and then you can sort of actually hear the footfall clattering out of the hall to get down to the pub, you know. And it kind of leaves you thinking, oh God, you know, because when you listen to it at the real, you
Which
know,
is what composer
it was written for. It's a really fabulous piece of music, you know. And that is the problem. I mean, this is the problem with social media now. Social media is so it's so unsubtle, it's so unnuanced. You've got to, the rule of social media is you've got to respond and react straight away. There's no allowance given for thought and for a thoughtful reply. You know, I'm thinking of setting up a new social media thing where you're forbidden from giving an answer to a question in under 15 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And for the young, you know, we give them a bonus of so many points to spend if they can adhere to it, you know. So you kind of bring them along more and say, right, you know, we want you to think about what you're saying, because if your mouth is open, you're going to put your foot in it.
Yeah.
Okay, asking somebody to contemplate something for 15 minutes in our society when it's like this, that's a shift. That's it. How do you induce that?
I mean,
that's an interesting.
The other thing as well is that people underrate these beautiful creatures here, you know?
I'm going to ask you to introduce us to your friend.
This is Dido, and Dido is my Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, who she was born a year ago. And you know, I lost my beloved Eloise 3 years ago today, um, and these guys do so much in terms of waking you up to the realities that are out there.
Mm.
And I watch her, and it's just hysterically funny. But my God, some of the things that she sees that I can't see, you kind of think, oh, that's interesting, you know?
Mhm.
And she's a different species. She's not human, but she understands me as much as I try to understand her. And there's a kind of a poetry there that makes me then extend that outwards to other aspects of nature, like birds and stuff. And
Yeah.
you know, we have a lot of green parrots in London now.
Just
In
wild. And they,
1861, a pair were accidentally released in London, and there's now over 500,000 of them.
wow, replacing the pigeons that were,
Yeah, and these are really beautiful birds. And every time I go walking in Kensington Gardens every morning, they now perch on my shoulders, on my head. They perch on Madam as well. And they're very talkative and they're very wise. And it's just great, you know?
birds are really smart. I
And
read that North America had a huge parrot population, but because of their feathers, colorful feathers, they were decimated.
South America. Yeah.
Yeah, the
I
Americas.
suggested to the London Zoo that rare species of parrot in the Amazon, like the hyacinth macaw, should now be let loose in London, because if the green guys are doing so good, then surely they will too, because people love them. And
Yeah.
you know, it's just curious to see their interaction with people, with the native wildlife. And
Yeah.
that takes an awful lot to, and also that takes you back to the way ancient humanity was speaking about life in general, because it wasn't just humanocentric. You know, the Egyptians had anthropomorphic gods, as we call them. But why? Because they understood what these animals were, and that they were psychoprompts. They were an aspect of us, of our, our deep underlying unconscious.
So
Well,
true.
they
Now,
also have a lot of abilities that we don't have. They can hear, they can see more acutely. They're messengers,
And they have patience.
and they're majestic. Yeah.
I was talking
I'm just
to
going
a
to say,
friend.
Paul has a relationship with ravens, and he goes out and plays his flute, and the ravens will sing back to
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. You
Yeah.
know, but I'm wondering if the what if the Egyptians were right that animals are an expression of our deeper unconscious, and in fact that if we lived in a mind state universe, that these are actual real manifestations of that. What if we started taking that seriously, and looked at the whole idea of animal consciousness as a part of our own, and
Mm.
ours as part of theirs?
You would
Because I
enjoy
know
our work. You would enjoy our work where you meet so many animal spirits and they have so much to say to you.
Also,
yeah,
years ago, the BBC produced a program called
Supernature?
Supernature, right? And this was like in the end of the 1990s or something. But they went around showing all the different abilities that we have in nature that we dismiss, like, oh, you can't have that kind of an experience. It exists in nature all around us, a constant.
absolutely, yeah. I
We
mean,
kind of lost touch with this as humanity, but it's there. It's all around us.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what's so key to the whole idea of ancient mythology and learning,
Mm-hmm.
is we forget about that because we've become so fixated on ourselves, you know?
Right.
And I find that really kind of baffling in many ways, because animals can offer so much. And, and there is that mystery of quite how did we discover what's good for us and what's poisonous, and how did we know? It just seems so odd. Like the rise of wheat. How did we cultivate wheat from the original grass, and how did we do it so quickly? How
Observing
do
nature,
we get cattle so quickly?
friending
Right.
nature, working with nature, not against her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe if we change the title from mystery schools to wisdom traditions, because wisdom traditions in every society exist, and in most cultures, unlike Western culture, the elders are respected as the containers of wisdom. They're bringing something to the table that you have to honor and understand to learn, because they spent a lifetime gaining this knowledge, and now the knowledge can be dispensed to the youngsters as they come along.
Well, look at science today and biomimicry. So you look at a butterfly's wings. How is it transparent? What is the optical illusion for that?
Right.
How does nature put those molecules together to create this? How can a tiny butterfly fly thousands and thousands of miles? You know, science has figured it all out. Nature has figured it all out. And science,
Yeah, I mean, this is where I'm interested in the whole
light
idea of
years by
evolution
its
in terms of
imitation.
we're obsessed with the whole idea of physical evolution, but what I'm more interested in is the idea of unconscious evolution, in the sense that, okay, we know that we're changing every second of the day, etc. But we talk about the survival of the fittest, but what do we mean by that in its widest possible term?
Our
You
very
know,
first interview with you, David, like almost 25 years ago, was about we can pick up the subtle signals in our environment that
yeah,
we can now see on a church carving as symbols that
yeah,
cymatics can reveal.
Oh, that, yeah.
And we
Mhm.
tripped around with you at a Templar chapel on the coast of England and looked at cymatics patterns.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Beautiful building that its sound system allowed us to see those subtle patterns designed in sacred proportion, and then look at
Yeah,
the symbols that were left there. We saw the same symbols arising from nature as were there all around us.
Yeah.
How did people know that back then? They were picking up on the subtle frequencies. They were listening to nature. We have receptor sites for nature to speak to us. If you listen, you are aligning yourself with
it's a
her.
really good point, actually, because I realized that I'd said in my book that the great tragedy of the sacred site was that once the sound patterns had developed into pictorial writing and script, at that point we began to, as a species, secede from the site, to take it out, to take it outwards into wider cities. At which point we then developed cities, and therefore the sacred site became this kind of like the heart of an old tree. It's
Really?
at the center of the forest, but the heart of the tree itself is rotten and empty because it's done its job. It's out there. But now I'm beginning to actually wonder if that's really true, and that in fact we are still actually using this kind of unconscious evolution from these places to discover what's truly out there. It'll be worth investigating further, I think. It's a subtle one. I'm going to speak to Keith Hearn about it actually, and see what we can dig
Yeah.
up about it.
Well, come on
And
back and tell us.
I just happened to pull up the slide of you and I together some 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago.
oh,
So
good God!
throw that up on screen for a moment here.
That is a picture of the cymatic screen of Paul playing that flute he's holding.
Yeah.
And this is the
Yeah, wow. Yeah,
fabric
I
pattern
remember.
that shows up. And
Yeah,
then you see
yeah,
it in petroglyphs and on cave walls,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
This is just John Stuart Reed putting sand down and piping up the sound underneath a vibrating membrane. This is what
And look at the way that in 22 years, cymatics has affected the color of my hair.
Exactly. Let me take this.
Jeff Oak is coming out with his new edition of the
right.
book Cymatics and will be joining us next year, early next year.
Let's take some questions. Rex Barker has his hand up first.
Yeah. Thank you, David. It's been sort of fascinating and almost you're losing me because it moves so fast onto issues. But I want to come back to this thing about we get bored, because my interest is far more in indigenous people, and in a sense you can't even call them, you can't generalize about them too, because indigenous people, some of the tribes I've known, there's no such thing as a self for the individual. The individual sees themselves as part of within a group. So whilst there are wise people in the group, if you put a question to them, the group as a whole receives the question, and you have no idea of who may answer. And there's an agreement about this. What I find fascinating with these people is they are never bored. because they're always fully present, they're always aware of what's around them, and they are the most delightful people.
Beautiful.
And what I would love to do is...
It's interesting. T. Lawrence says in Seven Pillars of Wisdom that he was wandering through a part of Arabia when he came across a tribe that he had not known of before. I think it was the Sleb. And the Sleb are the last remaining Kenites or Nazareans of that region. And he said he showed them a photograph of a building in Oxford to say this is where he came from. And they couldn't see it. All they could see was abstraction. And because it was the collective mind aspect of it. And I was reared, excuse me, I was reared for some years in the Australian outback amongst Aborigines who taught me a huge amount. And I have to say, when I pop my clogs and come back, I want to come back as an Aborigine because I'm obsessed with their beauty, both interior and exterior. I think they're a thoroughly wonderful people who have been so horribly treated. But they also have a collective soul rather than a soul that is individual. And I found it fascinating in terms of the dream time and
they're even more.
Go ahead.
You know? But
sorry, this is.
I'm being general when I say that we get bored because I'm speaking specifically of us Westerners and the whole commercial culture, of which I have to say I'm deeply cynical, and for which I apologize to all and sundry.
Mm-hmm. What were you going to say, Rex? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I don't want to, for me, there's no sort of hierarchy. There is differences, certainly. And if you look at the Native American and then you go, but I am most fascinated by the Tasmanian and Australian Aboriginals because I think they are aware of this world in an utterly different way to us.
Oh, totally.
Yes, and it's in a pity. It's a pity in a way that whilst you were there, you were way too young for them to pass any of this over, because the idea that they could give you an article that a certain person had touched some year in the past and they could retrace the journey simply from the touch with it shows you, in a sense, their awareness of the reality they live in them.
They taught me that very thing, psychometry. That's how I became an Egyptologist. I've never admitted this before to anybody, but I was able, when I became an Egyptologist, I took a course with the late Professor Julius Sampson, who was one of the last pupils of the great Sir Flinders Petrie himself. And we were at her flat one day. It was my 24th birthday, I think, something like that. And she'd taken me out the night before at the age of 92 and got me absolutely, objectively and subjectively drunk. And I woke up on her sofa with the mother of all hangovers. And I said to her in discussion afterwards, I said, how do you do it? And she tapped her head and she said, keep this intact and the rest looks after itself. And we got talking about all of this and then eventually came on to the whole idea of psychometry. And I said to her, you get all of these artifacts through from Sotheby's in New York and elsewhere. How can you tell if these artifacts are real or not? And she said, between you and I, and she said, this is why you and I are friends. She said, because like you, I can do it through touch. She said, I know. And she didn't even know. I hadn't even told her. But she picked it up on me. And it was a classic Irish Celtic thing that we're able to do that. Now, I don't understand why, but I've never questioned it. I know what's real and what's not. That's why when I found the codices, I knew they were the real McCoy. But I knew that for the sake of the Western world, I'd have to go down a scientific academic path to convince them that what we had was the real McCoy, which is a journey in itself, and you'll hear more about. But I must tell you one lovely story about the Aborigines. It occurred in the late 1700s. I believe that this is not apocryphal because I've checked it out. As Captain Cook's Endeavour approached the south coast of Australia, as they peered over the side, they saw these giant hopping rats. And Captain Cook said to two of his shipmates, "Look, I want you to take a boat across to the shore there and get there and see if you can find some of the native people and ask them what those giant hopping rats are." So two guys get into a boat and they paddle across. And they finally hit Australian land, and they find a couple of Aborigines sitting on a log, and they manage to gesticulate in symbolic language, "What are those giant hopping rats?" To which their reply was kangaroo, which is what they've been called from this day to this. Do you know what kangaroo means in Australian, in Aboriginal?
No.
It means don't know.
I don't know.
Wait, no. That's very interesting. If you look at the film Arrival, they use that comment in Arrival. I spent 6 months with the tribes in Sarawak, the Kayan tribe. This was in 1964 to 66. I was there for quite a period. And this is the people I met there. Now, I know, and this is the problem, Western thinking has destroyed these people. Because since I was there, the very fact, it's been solely for profit. So these people made this, well, in fact, we know from the Australian Aboriginals, we know from many Indigenous people, so they basically, they are lost in the Western world because it's not a world they understand. And they do drink, and they are, from our point of view, they're useless, but they're not. The trouble is we have seduced them into, in a sense, into modern technology, and it's like sending us somewhere. We've lost all bearings. So what I experienced with them was incredible. And I'm not going to tarnish that with meeting the people now that we have actually destroyed.
Have you read the book called Blackfoot Physics by F. David Peat, P-E-A-T? It's remarkable. It came out in the mid-1990s. You can still get hold of a copy of it. It's about indigenous knowledge, and it is fundamentally and frighteningly similar to the scientific principles we are looking at today. In the same terms as Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita. It's frightening, and this is where you're absolutely right in that it's the modern world that's done for these people. I mean, I met a Chilean shaman in Holland about 5 years ago, and she said the fundamental damage done to them by Catholic missionaries has been simply appalling. You know, the threat of hell, all of that. And she said it's very wrong because at the end of the day, they've got a fundamental knowledge that we need. And she's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And and the tragedy for the church is that actually the church needs it too. It needs to have an understanding of this, to understand where it is, because it too is going through change, you know, and that's what I find curious. And you know, the indigenous peoples, I just find it remarkable. When I was at school in the 60s, being part of the British Empire, you know, we were taught that these people were subhuman, more or less. And yet here we are 50 years later, and my God, we couldn't have been more wrong. These are a lovely, lovely people. And even in the 60s, I couldn't understand why they were treated the way they were. I found it baffling. You know, these were my friends, and what they taught me was how to live, how to survive. You know, they taught me how to get a glass of water in the middle of a desert.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
And that particular topic is still happening. One of our instructors.
It's very simple in a sense, because this goes with the
Yeah. So the professor takes us around to a lot of the British museums. And in one of them, there's a case of Celtic artifacts. And these were the small, scrolly, kind of iron artifacts. And I'm walking over to the case. I had this magnetic pull take me over to this case, and I'm staring at it. And intellectually, I'm going, I don't even like this stuff. It wasn't like it was beautiful to me. But my whole body just went into a zone, and I started tearing up, and I recognized it. It was just like speaking to me. I knew
Yeah,
this stuff. I
yeah,
knew this stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the professor
Wonderful.
comes over and he goes, what's happening? I go, I just know this stuff. Something's awakening. And he goes, oh, you'd make a very good art historian. And that was his response. And I'm like, how often does this happen? I asked him later, and apparently a lot. And so psychometry doesn't always need to that you hold it, but somehow I always interpreted that as that was a coded symbol that resonates with you. Just the viewing of it can transport you.
This must, under scientific terms, be measurable.
Yeah.
I don't understand why we're not taking it more seriously in terms of measuring, because if we can quantify it,
Yeah.
then we can use it as a tool for the progression of the study itself. I fail to understand why it's not being taken more seriously in that way. I've
Well,
come
also
across so
in the
many people who
Egyptian
do the same
rooms
thing.
of the British Museum, you can look at some of those just simple daily, day-to-day artifacts. And you can also get that people, I know a lot, myself and others have had that reaction. People do these past lives and they think they're Queen Nefertiti. No, I mean, relate to those everyday objects, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
Their commonality. I also want to say that I understand what you're saying about the mindset of Indigenous people. Not that I grew up in an Indigenous culture, but we all have those Indigenous roots. They all live within us. And my definition of ecstatic has come to mean, because we do ecstatic trance, but my definition of ecstatic has been that feeling of connecting with the all, the feeling the life force of the universe flow through you, the feeling of the companionship that the cosmos is your backyard, that the universe is here supporting you, living through you, that you are a member. You are one of those eyes, as you described the eyes of the peacock's tail feathers. You are one of those eyes peering and joining all the other eyes that are celebrating the universe with you. That's my definition of ecstatic. And I think that is the closest that I can describe to what growing up in those Indigenous cultures must have been.
Yeah, I mean, the closest we got, in a way. I mean, I'm a great fan of the British poets. Wordsworth describes it very aptly, and I feel this fundamentally myself quite regularly. I love the Northern European landscape, and you can go walking across a field that has no meaning for you. You've never been there, and suddenly your whole spine just gets it. You get a sense of immanence.
Yeah.
Something latent within that spot, and you can, once you're connected to it, you can stand there for hours looking at the sheer beauty of the corner of an empty field, newly ploughed, no leaves on the trees, just a copse, you, the ploughed ground, the empty sky, and nothing else. But you're in paradise because there's a sense of something running through you.
Yeah.
And that's what the poets got. That's what the Romantic poets seized hold of in the 18th and 19th centuries. That was their modus operandi, you know? And this is what drove forward civilization even further, because that then led to, obviously the great operatic works of people like Wagner and co. It led to even to scientific breakthroughs of to an extraordinary level. Because we understood that there was something there that they had to actually investigate. It's typical of the same thing. Why Edmund Hillary was asked, why did he climb Mount Everest? What was the motivation? He said, because it's there.
Yeah. Well, that's why Newton was looking at God's handiwork and physics was born. I lost the thought. So
well, Fazard is going to be next, and Fazard is a NYU professor.
I just want to say, David, what you were describing is that empty field. I remember walking with you in a misty, empty field, and a white horse just walks by. And we just see
that's it.
And he walks by.
That's cool.
And I look at you and you go, yeah. And we carry on. I mean, just magical moments.
That's right.
And I also want to say that, David, you're one of them. You traipse along with you and magical things happen, right? You open to these mysteries and magic comes and greets you at every turn. You open up, you choose to open, and the universe starts to speak with you, and magic portals open, magic happens all around you. That also is part of the ecstasy. That's also part of the mysteries drawing you in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to underscore what you just
well. Remember that well, because our Earth is a fantastic mystery. And you know, what's disappointing about living in London is that nobody's looking at anything except their iPhones.
That's
You
everywhere.
know how many people I've seen knocked down by cars on Oxford Street because they left or right when crossing because they were on their iPhones? I've seen 5 people knocked down by cars. And you know what? I've seen all 5 get up with their phones intact, not look at all, and carry on crossing. They're like automata.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's not just London, but I love
Um,
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
if we reversed history and gave Wordsworth and Keats and Byron iPhones, what would the result be, I wonder, you know?
Oh, the mass distraction, right? That we're all battling.
Yeah.
I wandered lonely as an
That's
iPhone.
really true. Yeah. All right. Let's talk to Farzad next,
Okay.
who was also a recent guest. Oh, you would love this one, David, on alchemy as a metaphor, as a science, as a history, as the alchemists of old. Hello,
Right.
welcome back, Farzad.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, Farzad. Hi.
Hi, David. Nice to meet you. It's I've had a lot of laughs this morning. Really enjoy the conversation.
You're welcome.
It's great. And so never know what's going to happen next is the feeling, which is great.
Yeah.
Way in the beginning, you said about the beheaded knight, the Green Knight, that whole story. I just wanted to relate that yesterday I was on with Paul and Laura and another 5 or 6 or 7 other people doing ecstatic trance postures, and I had a very fleeting one. A few other people said it was all fast too, but the really fleeting one I had, I was trying to grab the images. It was difficult. Involved involved a beheading. I couldn't say beheading yesterday because everyone was telling very beautiful stories, and here I was with a decapitation vision. And the way I ended up saying it was like, yeah, there was this like creature with this being with a really big headdress taking me down into the ground, underground, and it was dark, and then there was a cell. It was like a monk's cell. Open that door and go deeper in, and it was at that point that the decapitation happened. The head was removed. The headdress in the head is how I put it, was removed and put on the ground. But it was very much a beheading, and then I was like, okay, here I am with a big head on the floor in this cell. And then it shifted out and other things happened, and I was just trying to grab this, and I just fell into a dream in this very brief period of the rattling that Paul was doing. Anyway, so it was fun to see that again about 24 hours later, coming out of your mouth with the entire story of the Green Knight and Saturn and the dark part of the year. And, it's all it's all cool. I mean, I knew going into darkness is important, but it's funny that it took 24 hours for it to come into a fuller meaning. And vis-a-vis what you were saying about time. We want everything fast, that we should outlaw immediate tweets and retweets. It should be at least 15 seconds or even longer, 15 minutes, maybe 15 days. Sometimes it takes for stuff to gel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I mean, just spending time which you're not in control of with an object or a person or a thought does this funny thing. So this morning I got an email right about when I was tuning in here from I guess he was an old student of mine from like last year. Anyway, so he's like at the end of his graduate student first term, and he's writing this letter, and he's like, this is the stuff we were talking about, and here's the image, and what do you think? And I got to tell you, and here's Sean Kelly. And what is Sean Kelly talking about? Something that you were relating earlier. Well, almost, it kind of was coming to, what are the mystery schools now? That's the question, right? So I think his name's Sean Kelly. I got to check again. Kelly says there's the first axial age. Then you kind of lose it in the middle, which is where we are. Then there's the second axial age coming, where there's sort of the thing that was planted here is coming out over here. And that was the whole idea, that this is like a message, and there's the transmission, and then there's the echo finally reconstituted. And so, you know, that's the time thing. And so all this is hitting me on my head as I'm sitting here Sunday morning listening to the Green Knight have his head removed, or almost removed. No, the Green Knight did have his head removed, and then Gawain almost had his head removed. And anyway, so it was fun to hear all that stuff and then just reflect on
my father used to say to me sometimes, just jokingly, because he had a great sense of humor, and so we would riposte with humor, because Dad said, in the humor there is the truth. Okay, so to riposte with humor is to actually challenge wisdom with wisdom, you know. And he said to me, "My son, you speak rot." And I said, "Dad," I said, without rot, there would be no growth.
The compost, yeah.
And I said, "Consider this, my father. I am, in the Latin, no longer compos mentis, I'm compost mentis."
Oh, good one. Yeah.
Now consider this. In the root layers of the earth, mycelium play a humongous part, to such a degree that in the past 5 years, we found that mycelium has a massive effect upon the human system itself.
Yeah.
And now we're finding the whole thing is reflected throughout the entire cosmos, because we're finding now that the whole cosmic web acts very similarly, if not the same as mycelium growth.
I'd say the mycelium growth acts as the cosmic wave.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got a whole civilization named after this, Mycenae, you know. I mean, there's not mushroom for thought here, but however, sorry, bad pun. But you know, I'm a fun guy to be with. No, sorry, I'll stop. I'll refrain. But the fact of the matter is that it is curious that what we see here on Earth is reflected now in the heavens, which is part of the Lord's Prayer. I believe it's in the Buddhist prayers as well. And therefore, in a sense, what we think is new is already here. You know,
eternal. Yeah,
it is. I mean, I think about technology. We think it's invented to be new, but actually,
again and again.
It's just a reflection of what's in nature anyway.
Right.
You know, I see a tube train going down the tube in London, you know, and it reminds me of the maggot you see on an apple, you know, even with the two spots on the back, which are like the two windows, you know. And as it crawls off into its hole in the apple, that's what you see on a tube train. Now, that's, you know, that's my bizarre way of thinking. But actually, is there much difference, you know?
Right.
So it's interesting you're looking at the alchemy of this, because I find it really fascinating, the whole idea of it's the reflection. But between the reflection, it's between you looking into the mirror and the mirror itself, is the point at which we have the point of transition, you know?
Yeah, it's neither you nor the mirror, it's the space in between.
Yeah.
And that's why these images of the galaxies and the mycelia and your nerve cells, there's a lot of space between that. Indra, any net of Indra, any network, it's the spaces in between. That's where, that's the womb, that's the Taoist sort of emptiness space. The yin that allows for stuff to happen. That's where the new stuff comes in. And with all due respect to the old stuff, it just is maintaining the space for new stuff.
The new stuff, as Augustine says in City of God, the new is the old reconstituted, which is
the old alchemical phrase, though.
Yeah, exactly.
You dissolve it and then you coagulate it and dissolve it.
It's recycling, you know.
Yeah.
And it's
a whole series on science and spirituality. Like, what would science look like infused not with religion but spirituality, from holding the whole shebang as sacred? I'm going to elect you guys to that panel. We're going to have these discussions in
We'll
future.
get started with psychometry. We'll quantitate that right away, and then
Sounds good.
go from there. We get
right. Yeah.
We use all our
Ghostbusters kind of
faculties
thing, and
in the course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll psychometrize Dido here, you know.
Thanks so much, Farzad.
It's good to meet you.
Good to
Great.
meet you. Yeah,
Thank
see
you
you
so
again.
much.
Yeah, and
Cheers.
speaking of looking to the stars, we have Tony.
No, James.
Oh, James. I'm sorry. Yeah, James first, then Tony. Okay. Hello, James.
Yeah, hi there. I'm really enjoying this very much. Lots of stuff has gone through my head, and I've written a few things down, some for my own reference later on, but just a couple of things. One is that for the last several weeks, I've been taken with a quote from Giordano Bruno, who, as you may know, was burnt at the stake by the Roman Catholic Church precisely because he said, and I put it up on my wall, so I've got, it's like my journal is all over the wall, taped up on there, that to the extent that we communicate with nature, so we ascend to divinity through nature.
Beautiful.
And of course, this was the absolute eradication of certain kinds of hierarchy, but I was just reflecting on the nature of mystery school, and that's why I'm on here today, because I've been involved on several different levels. I kind of keep them in separate compartments, but I've been running these postures, static postures here, and I work with a group of psychoanalysts who come once a month. They're now in their 8th year. But in the course of that, I began to feel that what I was missing in both the psychedelic work, which is going on, which I'm deeply involved with, and what's it's kind of come up sometimes for me in the postures work, is that these rituals came out of a community. They came out of a community that had its own cosmic structure, its mythos, it's whatever, however that, and that what's happened today is we've become very individualized. And at least in the United States, my experience is that psychedelic work is mostly about, well, what did you experience? And so everybody's sitting around chatting about, oh, I had this thing, I had this thing, I had this thing. And there's kind of this psychedelic tourist conversation going on around the table. And what I've been missing is where's the community? Where's the service, or who are we serving when we do this? And so some of my training was, when I begin work, is to sing a song that translates as, help me, help you, help me, help you, help everyone. So that when I say to people, what we're doing is that we're anchoring this in service, yes, to oneself. Anyway, so I've been taking a look again at the whole mystery school phenomenon, because while we say it's sort of here, I've been wondering, how can I deconstruct the way we do psychedelic ceremony these days to re-engage the communal aspect we're missing, because we're so highly prizing what I myself have done, but what have we collectively done? And I know there's some movement going on with that. That's what I'm working with. But I just want to say one more thing, and then I'll be done. Very early on, you talked about the light bulb going off in the brain. And one of the things I noted, both when I was working for hospice, which I did for 15 years, and what I noticed when I was a teacher, I started teaching 3rd and 4th grades, and I ended up teaching college, was there would come a moment at some point when a student would suddenly get it. And I could always tell, because it wasn't just that the light bulb went off in their brain, it was that their skin lit up. I could be looking at somebody in the classroom and their skin would literally light up. Or when someone was even dying and I'd be counseling, suddenly they would sort of like get it. And they're even on their dying bed, their skin would light up. There's something about the manifestation of comprehension, of joy, of awe, of even this kind of luminous zone we kind of enter, which translates the skin into another vehicle of expression of the very thing we think is internal. It becomes externalized. And those who see that is why I stayed with teaching for so long. Those are the moments I cherished, when a student would suddenly get it. And it was just like, I think, okay, I've done my job on the planet.
Yeah.
You go to the great religious texts and you look at some of the things they speak of, and I'm looking at my own discovery of the Jordan codices at the moment. So it's in relation to the Old and the New Testaments. There's always this thing, and it runs right throughout both testaments, of the shining face.
Hmm.
And it's all to do with enlightenment, you know, the whole idea of the Elohim, the bright shining ones. It's all to do with realization, because realization is not yesterday, it's not tomorrow, it's in the here and now.
Hmm.
So when you're realizing something, as you know, you're not, it's not yesterday, it's not tomorrow, it's now. And you're in that now to such a degree that you're in an infinite moment. And so, in that infinite moment, that's the point at which the atom splits, in which the energy is released, in which you then are able to absorb what is happening. That's when the joy really begins to really hit you. I died in 1995 twice.
Mhm.
This thyroid disease, you know. My doctor said to me when I came around, they said, for God's sake, never take drugs because you don't need them, you know, because I've got this hormonal thing, and they're quite right. It's part of being Irish, I think. You know, we take Guinness instead. It's much preferable. And and Guinness is dual, you know, because you've got the dark at the bottom and the light on the top. It's very interesting. But however, what's curious about being dead, and I recommend this experience to anybody who wants to die, is that when you go to this other place, you are not individual. You are actually part of a collective.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing that when you come back, you realize. And the strange experience I remember that most about it was when I got back from it, I felt as if I was wearing lead boots. I felt suddenly I was in the burden of being individual again, and it just felt really horrible. And I realized that Pen, that we are individuals, but in a collective sense. That's the way we're meant to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a really profound thing, because then I realized that this is what the whole idea of spirituality and religion is about. It's about the whole idea of the realization, and therefore your skin is shining. I mean, you look at Moses on the mountain. I mean, you know, he comes down, his face is shining so much he has to wear a veil. And you
Mhm.
get that throughout the whole of the New Testament. You get it in the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, and in other traditions too. In the Celtic traditions in Britain, Taliesin, the Druid, his face also shines so brightly. It has,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. I've also had moments in which I've almost died. And out of one of them, I came out of it realizing, and it was, I don't know where this came from. The mantra I said was that thou art, I am. And so
Yeah,
for an
yeah,
entire month, I really for home, everything I looked at was me in that sense. It was just, there was no boundary there. I mean, I could tell there was a difference. But then one time, the thing I loved the most about that experience is I saw a dandelion in bloom next to the sidewalk, and I was so awestruck. I got down on my knees in the middle of public on the sidewalk to worship this dandelion because it was so extraordinary,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
and when did they let you out?
Yeah.
Well, they almost tried to put me in. I mean, I've got this Celtic background, and so maybe it's
Yeah,
I've got some Irish there somewhere, I think. But I would know things, and no one would know how I knew it.
yeah,
And to me, it
yeah.
was just perfectly obvious. So I would just say so, and then they would be scared of me because I knew things they'd never told anybody. And I didn't quite get reality in that way because my reality certainly was not easily squeezed into the cultures I was living in.
In his autobiography, Goodbye to All That, Robert Graves describes being at school in Westminster sorry, no, Charterhouse in southern Britain. And he said he was out on the cricket pitch one day, just, you know, lazily doing nothing, when suddenly he had this experience of knowing everything at once.
Hmm.
He said it was momentary, it was very brief, but in the moment it was eternal. And he could ask anything, and he would give him the answer. He knew everything.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's our
Once
natural
you've had that
state.
experience,
Take our blinders
come
off.
back, yeah, and you're limited to what's there. It's very frustrating.
Well, just one more story. When I was teaching as a college professor for a while, and one day one of the heads of the college, came to me from the general meeting of all the upper ups there, and wanted to tell me something we were going to be talking about in the faculty meeting. And I heard what he was saying. I said, you're wrong. And he said, we don't know how you know. Yes, you're right, but we don't know how that you know, because we've never told anybody. So please keep your mouth shut. So I was literally being told to shut up.
Well, you
What a delight.
You try and ask an Irishman to keep his mouth shut. I guarantee.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It's impossibility.
I'm done for now. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James. Good to see you.
It's like
These kinds of
Nice to meet you
are
all.
obviously how a lot of this knowledge comes, right?
Yeah.
The sages of the ages, right? We don't question how this downloads come. These are available to all of us. We have the receptor sites to see it, right? Because when that happens, you're opening your bandwidth, you're imbibing more life force, more light. We have the receptor sites to recognize it and see it when it's happening. And I've often followed those paths. You come to a crossroads in your life.
Yeah.
It's the pathway that lights up for me that I followed. And it's never set me down the wrong path. Right.
Hey, Laura, there's another word here. Okay. Now, this is important because the archaeology of our language is an understanding of who and where we are. Okay.
Yeah.
So our whole language is an archaeology in itself, because every word has a meaning, and that meaning comes from the deep and ancient past. Okay. So if we're going through a crisis, it means going through change, because the word crisis is related to cross. And all of the great heroes hung from crosses.
Right.
Now, on top of that, the hero harrows hell. Hell in early Greek is a verb meaning transformation.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So our whole vocabulary is an archaeology in itself,
Right.
I mean, this is what's so funny about the mysteries. People are looking for treasure in the mysteries, and they think about gold and silver and jewels. But treasure in French and then in Latin is trésor, which means words.
Yeah.
It's the word thesaurus that you need to go to for to use the same term, but in a different way,
Yeah.
So the words we use are our treasure.
Yeah.
The very script we use is the liberating factor here. This is what we're enunciating now. If we could not write language with the script that we have, okay, if we were still limited to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, okay, we'd be still 3,000 or 4,000 years back.
Right.
Well, I have to introduce you to Janet Rudolph, who's one of a guest. She's been a guest. And just listening, she's a member of our community, does the ecstatic trance ritual body posture work with us. But to listen to her decode from the Hebrew, the early Hebrew, direct from the Egyptian, is to get a glimpse of the really multifaceted, multi-layered, holistic meaning of some of these concepts. And to enter into that state, I'm thinking, oh, wow, from pictographs, symbols, to understand the fuller meaning of this, to understand the relationships of one word to the other, and these dynamics of nature, I'm thinking, wow, that is such a beautiful experience, even to get close to that, and how our early ancestors were understanding the world around them.
Yeah.
The mysteries and everything.
For the shout out.
I'm sorry, Janet, go ahead.
Thank you for the shout out.
Oh, yeah. You have to come back and decode more of that for us.
Thank you, James. And I'm going to
we want a symposium. Get all these people together and just crosstalk.
You mentioned Janet.
Yeah, we all need to get together for one grand conversation.
Yeah, this is our life.
We need to laugh our socks off,
Yeah, and Tony's next, but I'm gonna have Janet react
because
to this.
Because I shouted you out.
Talking about word, the power of words.
Yeah. Do you want to say more to that? Yeah.
I love that about the thesaurus and treasure, because that is, in fact, words create reality. We co-create our own reality, and by the words we use, so like history in the feminist community, herstory, and even that, both of them are unbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
So that how, you know, the vocabulary that we use will form our reality, and I love that. I think it's just said so poetically there.
Yeah,
so thank you.
absolutely.
We've got a county in England called Herefordshire, and I'm calling it now. I've decided to call it His and Herefordshire.
I love see, yes, and then you have a balanced one, yeah.
Oh,
And of course, you know, and of course, Eve means life, but it's come down to us as a curse rather than as a gift. So that there's, you know, how language is used and how it affects our mindset is our foundation of our world.
The curse is turning to light, I can tell you now, because we have the evening now. And evening is about the beauty of twilight and what becomes of it. And, you know, as we begin to understand more and more, we begin to see a greater depth to these beautiful things called words. And frankly, I know I've complained about the social media culture and everything else. I suspect it's a phase we needed to go through so that we can finally break out of the boredom of social media and explore the beauty of words and their concepts. And the young, that's going to be the next thing for the young. The young are going to think, well, words are just fantastic. They're just so beautiful. And when they discover poetry and rhythm again, we're in for one hell of a change.
And then there's the concept, some poets said you use words to express what cannot be expressed in words.
Yeah, exactly right too. Yeah. I couldn't agree more with you. It's a wonderful thing that's happening right now. We just need to appreciate
like a renaissance happening all over again for our time.
It is. It's exactly that. Yeah.
Thank you all for being part of it.
For jumping on and come back if you have more, for sure.
We have more.
I'm going to
continue. I just want to quote Thomas Berry here,
okay,
who says, "The universe is a collection of subjects, not objects. Collection of beings."
And I wanted to refer back to the experience both James talked about as well and with David, and that is that the near-death experience, the ultimate mystery school, because it just is an initiation like no other initiation. When you come that close to death, all of a sudden the world changes, your world perspective, your abilities, your talents, who you are reveals itself. So,
and also that when we are doing our work in a community, in a group, there's so much cross-correlation. It is something for all of us individually and collectively as an experience.
And
thank you.
Tony, thank you for your patience. And Tony, of course, being an astronomer, has that ability to look to the stars and to experience the stars within at the same time.
Yeah, I'm a spacey guy, so I have to admit that my question has segued to my question, which is segued to another one, as this fascinating discussion has gone on. Just out of curiosity, I understand that there have been studies of the origin of the English language and even what the first word in English was. I wonder, I've heard a story, I don't want to repeat it until I research it myself, but I'm just wondering if that would not be an interesting thing to look at.
Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm Anglo-Irish by blood, so I kind of see English in a different way.
Yes.
Because of course I come from the Celtic language table with Gaelic and everything else, and you know, the great thing about English is that it's one of those language which like Hebrew you can pun in, but you can pun with a purpose. So you can pun, you know, I'll give you an example. There's a great Irish joke told by a comedian called Frank Carson. Maggie O'Murphy goes to the doctor. She says, Doctor, I've forgotten to take my contradictory tablets. He said, you're ignorant. She said, that's right, 3 months. Okay. So to see the joke, you've got to understand the words and their meaning. That's the joy of language, you know. So you're going to rise up like a tree to the light to understand that, because you know everybody else understands it too. And that's what's so curious. And English, they say, is a Saxon language, but of course it's been interspersed largely by Celtic, by even ancient Egyptian words. The English word hero comes directly from the Egyptian word Hiru, which of course is a title of the god Horus and stuff like that. It's difficult to believe that there was an original English word, in the sense that English is such an evolved language in terms of expression and complexity. I find it difficult to think that it would have come from one test tube source somewhere in northern Germany, if you know what I mean. I'm not being skeptical, but what I'm saying is that it's evolved is so profound that, you know, it's not surprising it's one of the world's most popular languages, you know.
No, I totally agree with you. It's become the lingua franca, pretty much, at least in scientific circles.
Great pun, I love that.
Yes. Well, I then when James talked about the dandelion, I got it. You know, I found that to be an amazing story, and I appreciated him talking about the light bulb blooming and actually coming on and seeing how you could actually see something happen in people's skin when that you could envision this happening. And I totally believe this. But one of the things I'd like to get to, you know, it's part of the light bulb going off. And there is a hypothesis I have that there's a causality for the light bulb going off. And it doesn't necessarily happen randomly. In my hypothesis, I'd like to test this, but it seems that often it involves some level of effort for the aha moment to happen. There has to be some level of concentration, focus, love, whatever, towards what you're studying, and then something happens. And that's been the case in my life, that the realizations I've had, sometimes when I write a paper, often I struggle and struggle. I'm kind of a nightmare for other people, because generally I end up writing my scientific paper the night before the absolute deadline or before my presentation. But that's when everything comes together, and I've noticed how important that is. But I'd like to suggest that there is a reason why things happen, and then to correlate this with science. And Laura had a comment, and in my field, astronomy, in many fields of science, there's a great effort that goes in to what's happening by people. They're invested in that, and little bits of knowledge fall in, like from the Webb telescope. All sorts of new things are coming in, and then the people who are working on this intensely say, "Aha! Then that must mean." And Webb is doing things it was never designed to do, because of these little inspirations that have happened with the new capability. So I see, if I can connect the spiritual with the scientific, I see it really as a continuity of one thing. I know that some people regard science to be what Edison did, 10,000 experiments. It's very rarely 10,000 experiments, at least in the areas which I'd go. It's more studying something out, you see data, and you put it through test, and the tests are the scientific method. And this keeps, this differentiates between opinion and objectivity. It gives at least the probability that various people will see things the same way. So I find this interesting, also really intrigued by the comment about the cosmic web and mycelium, and I'd not made that connection before, but I promise you I'll think about it.
You must. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
I love that the new telescope is named Webb Space Telescope.
You know, there's a birthday card I got last year, and it showed Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson out on the moors, you know, and Sherlock Holmes says to Watson, look at the sky. What do you see? And Watson says, well, I see the you know, the Jupiter. I can see that the moon is in aspect, and I can see there are hundreds of thousands of of galaxies out there and stars and everything else. And he says, "Why, Watson? What do you why, Holmes? What do you think?" And Holmes turns around and says, "Watson, somebody's stolen our tent." And in a sense, this is what Conan Doyle says elsewhere in his books. It's seeing the obvious. The obvious, it sometimes takes so long to hit us. So when you turn around and say, you wait to the last moment because that's the way it happens, it's that crisis point again.
Yeah.
And what fascinates me is how information, either in our brains or beyond it, somehow organizes itself to be right for transmission when we come to write the paper.
Yeah.
Because you've been holding it obvious for so long, Tony.
Yeah.
Yeah. In some subconscious way.
And I think there's another postulate or axiom that might be tested. And that is that, is there some rhythm that prepares us, that prepares you, that prepares each one of us for the discoveries that we make, that is unique from everybody else? I mean, you were 6 years in the outback of Australia. My goodness, what that prepared you for. I mean that you never would have anticipated when you were there, probably. And
Key part of your education.
You're very true. You're very right there. I mean, it's like it continues through life. You're anticipating things that you cannot begin to describe will happen to you, but it seems almost as if we have a sense that it's going to happen in a way. That's why the whole time thing, about being in the ever-present moment, there being no future, no past, it fascinates me because
the timeline seems to be able to go both ways in it.
Exactly.
We have these experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
And then science comes up with a theory, time is fluid both ways. I'm like,
quite right too,
Well, just a little compact story, if I could. As an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania, I decided to take a semester and a summer off, and I went to work at a brand new state-of-the-art radio telescope that MIT and Harvard had constructed. This was out of this world. Nothing like it existed before. And 2 years earlier, as a freshman at the university, I had talked myself into a class that was very unusual for an undergraduate to take, let alone a freshman. And I was competing with graduate students in this, and it was on 19th century astronomy.
Oh, wow.
It was called practical astronomy. We dealt with things like meridian transits and addressing time and addressing errors and addressing the spherical coordinates in the sky. Well, working at MIT, the telescope could not point. They would point it up in the sky and it would be off. It would not be at the object they were looking at. And I was instructed to sit with the technician day after day and make measurements and vector diagrams that nobody could make any sense out of, none of the professors at Harvard or MIT. And then I woke up one morning after doing this for 2 months and I knew what the answer was. It was nothing but 19th century astronomy that none of them had studied. And it was so unlikely that I would have studied it. And I applied that method, added a couple of extra variables, and we solved the problem. And that's been the method used for correcting the pointing of radio telescopes ever since.
Wow.
But I woke up one morning and it's like I dreamed it. I knew the answer, but I'd been prepared in some way with this very unlikely event 2 years before.
So anyway, you to take that obscure.
Yeah, you've had the Mendeleev experience of the periodic table. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
Who's writing our life with us?
So I want to say that there's not really a distinction. I think science is a method. It's a way to evaluate. But inspiration comes from here, and that's so critical.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. No, I go with that entirely. So, but it's interesting that we use the word science to encapsulate that whole experience,
I'm wondering what science of the future is going to look like if we can open up the bandwidth to include those kinds of moments and set the stage to get there.
It's there. It's there now.
It's happening now.
It's happening now.
Yeah.
What we do is apply a filter, and there are all sorts of random thoughts that people get in the name of religion, in the name of whatever dogmatism, whatever their pet ideas are. There are a lot of ideas that people get that are random, and science is a way to filter out these random.
You made that point very clear. I'm just saying, what if we were to honor all the methodologies of opening up to receive more of those kinds of
I think we nebulize into a comfort zone, and that's the problem with the human race. We need to nebulize around the comfort zone, but not in it. That's my idea. Forgive me. I'll be back in 2 minutes. I just need to go and.
Well, we're actually winding up, so we're at the end of our time.
You can go
ahead and take a break.
Take a quick break.
I'll be back very shortly.
I'll just going to mention, thank you, Tony, so much for how much you contribute on a regular basis. And it's been such an inspiration to us. I was just going to also mention that these conversations we're continuing in 2024 in the same way that we're doing them now, 3 weeks of the month or whatever. The first week of the month is our roundtable leadership program, where we allow everybody to come who wants to be a part of the ongoing growth of the Institute and the direction, and talking more about the posture work as well, getting into the experiential understanding more, and integrating that. But this thing has really been a platform for Laura and I just to ride on the back of such amazing individuals that are leading the way and look guideposts to new knowledge, new understandings. And we just really are so pleased and excited about all that it's provided for us. We really want to invite you on this journey to participate, to make suggestions for guests, to be a part of how this whole thing unfolds together. We began this thing during the pandemic like everybody else. We had to pivot, and we didn't know exactly what was going to be next. And this is what it's turned into, is these amazing community members that continue to join us on a regular basis and to push the envelope forward. And we're just along for the ride. So what a fantastic opportunity it is for us.
Move the dial through dialogue.
Beautiful.
And also, in our small way, just put the conversation forward to help usher in, right, this expansion of worldview and these experiences and direct experience. So,
and Tony has been a guest probably for. Oh, speaking of Tony, this is the week for in our part of the world, this northern hemisphere. This is the week of the solstice. And Tony, I know you said before in many of the presentations about us each making a marker in our own home, our own property. And we've done that. And I think many people have taken you as an inspiration to do that as well.
And by the way, it's the solstice every place on Earth. It's just we've given up the language winter and summer solstice because they're just the opposite in the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. So we talk about the December solstice and the June solstice.
Right, to be inclusive of the whole
and that's inclusive of everybody.
So, and that's part of making your personal relationship with the stars.
Well, it is. I mean, the idea of what I do very easily, I have a place I stand in the morning, and I stand in that very place the entire year, from spring from summer to winter, and watch the swing of the sun along the horizon, which is extensive. And I do the same thing in the evening for sunset. And it's not perfect, but it has, this rhythm has some kind of inner meaning to me. I don't know why, but I feel time in a way that I have never before. Well, look at this.
Yeah, this is what we did here on Equinox just recently with a gathering. And so this is the stone circle we have, and we all got out each day and greeted the sun. And went through proper steps of ritual to honor all of spirit that surrounds us. And so we had this wonderful experience of looking to the sunrise each day and the power of that, and then making a marker accordingly using the gnomon technology that Tony introduced us, where we take the tip of the shadow, we follow that alignment, which gives us a perfect east-west alignment. And so we're going to be doing this again this time during the solstice, which will give a curve following the solstice, the winter, and then on the other side of the line will be the spring solstice when it comes in
Summer
summer
solstice.
solstice when it comes.
No,
Yes.
no, the June solstice and the December solstice.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
there you go.
You're universally correct when you do that. I'm wondering if David has seen this megalithic monument in Scotland before.
I want to come along and see. I want to be there. I'm gonna.
Isn't it wonderful? Look at that. Look at the size of the rocks that Paul moved himself.
Yeah.
There's one thing that's missing. It needs some holy water, which the Irish have been the only nation in the world, I believe, followed soon after by the Scots, who have turned holy water into booze. I shall come with me when I come over to anoint the place. I think you know,
will you bring
because we're only a couple of days away now from the point at which the sun will stop for 3 days.
Yes.
And give us that sort of point of resurrection,
Of alignment. Yeah.
upon which then the days then get longer, you know. And that's another fantastic thing about nature, you know, the whole idea that the sun seems to stop and then it kind of gears itself up again. It's just wonderful, actually, you know, this whole beginning of light. I feel joyful that we've reached so quickly the shortest day, and now from now on we can look forward to the spring, because the days are getting longer. It's great because I have to say, in this country, I find January and February particularly difficult because they seem so dark and so dull. And you know, well, what I mean by that is I don't want to sort of do a downer, but the fact of the matter is that, you know, once the Christmas decorations go down,
right,
and there's no light displays anymore, it makes it all the more difficult when you're walking along the street thinking, God, when will spring begin again? You know, you just want it to happen. And then you see the first snowdrops, and then you see the crocuses, and then you see the daffodils, and you think, thank goodness, you know, it's such a wonderful thing. And of course, I've learnt in my aged years that this today, now, the stopping of the sun is about rewinding the whole cosmos thing, like a Victorian timepiece, to get it going for another year. I love that.
One of the things I like to do when I observe sunrise and observe sunset is journal the time of this. And it's remarkably different as the days get longer and shorter. And I'm fortunate because I have a good horizon on both my east and west side of the mountains. So that makes it nice.
It's plenty of sun all winter long in the Southwest.
And we get,
So David, come on out and we'll do an event around, have a little mystery school event with you.
Mystery school,
here.
I'd love that. That would be great. You know, we could have such fun. I can't tell you. And when I get to France, everybody, you're all welcome to come across, and we'll deliberate the mysteries to the French.
Hang out at the chateau.
And Tony, you've got to come too and do your gnomon thing.
Yeah. Well, where is this?
Astronomy thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm either going to be on the Franco-Swiss border or somewhere in the Dordogne. I'm expecting to be there sometime in the summer next year. And as I said, it's open house. Anybody wants to come to the Koyomongye Institute, they're very, very welcome. I'd love to see you all there.
Well, I'm interested. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, you must come over. You've got to. It's a special place, and you know,
let me ask. I assume you use wine as a tool, not Guinness there.
Well, now it's a bit of a balance, really. You know, we've got Vichy water, so you know, that goes very well with the cognac, which is not far away from where I want to be.
Cognac with the Armagnac, yes.
Well, exactly. You see, this is the thing. So we'll see what
you do.
So I'm degrading the program. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's what community is all about. That's what we want.
Yes, exactly.
Beautiful. Tony,
hey, don't forget, guys, that brandy is called eau de vie. Okay, water of life.
This was back when biomass in the water was a real problem, and how do you purify it? You run it through and make alcohol, mild alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was the medicinal.
And alcohol is itself an alchemical transformation, by the way. So we're not on illegal territory, you know.
Well, you talked about the plant kingdom earlier and that mycelium, and think of that in our gut and that biome and how that is regulating our hormones, and it's like another. We're probably more plant than animal flesh when totality.
And don't forget, with alcohol, if you want the proof, it's on the bottle.
Oh, all right, Tony. Thank you, brother. We
Well, a
love it.
great program. Thank you very much, David,
Yeah.
Paul.
Good to see you, Tony. Good,
Yeah.
very good to
Thank
see
you.
you.
I know
Bye-bye.
that you've mentioned your codices for a while. I know you have a new book coming out on that. You'll have to come back and talk with us more.
Yeah, this is a
about
much
that.
bigger story to itself.
Yeah. So,
But
you know, to be
It's a
continued.
big story, and as soon as I've got the go ahead, I will give you guys a call. We'll sort something out, and then I will spill the beans. Very rare species of.
Yeah, understood. And also the Western mysteries. I mean, you make a dent and you make a dent and you make a dent, but there's so much to cover.
Yeah, we got to get back.
So we hope that you'll continue to.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'd
And
like
also
to do
want to
another
pair you up with
program.
other folks here, the alchemists and Janet and various people. And let's drill deep into some of these.
Hey, let's do something on alchemy next time. That'll be great. I look forward to that. That'll be
good.
Good.
That would be fantastic.
Thanks.
And
It's such fun, you guys. You always turn something like this into such fun. I'm so grateful to you, to you all. It's been great. It's been really lovely. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll see you over there sometime soon.
over here, over there. Yeah.
Well, what the hell, you know?
Wonderful.
We always could use another 2 or 3 hours with you, David, but this would be a good start. Well, next time.
Next year.
Next time we'll make it 2 or 3 hours. We'll call it. We'll do that.
By special invitation. All right.
Thank you.
Blessings, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.